Mohammed and all of you for being such gracious hosts. This has been a wonderful experience. I've really enjoyed the last few days, and it's unfortunate that this is my last day. If I'd known I was going to enjoy it so much, I would have stayed for a few more days.
Well, you're more than welcome to join us anytime.
But this has been wonderful. So what I thought I'd do today, while yesterday my talk focused on general publishing in top journals, this is focused more on information systems. And I've been passionate about information systems and understanding the field, what direction it's going, what are the things that we can do to make it better, move in more productive directions. So I've done a lot of introspective studies. So what I thought I'd do is cobble them together and try and give a story of the field. What's going on? And I do it under the basic question.
That you might want to just start the presentation more, just with your finger.
Oh, okay. Oh, this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how has IS research progressed? And so this is a very broad question. And the question, of course, everyone might have in their mind is, what is progress? What does that mean? And so I've looked at 4 dimensions, 4 aspects of progress. And these are not the only 4, but these are 4 that I'm going to talk about. If you go back and you look at the first ISIS, 1980 was the first ISIS. And Peter Keane gave a keynote speech in that ISIS. And he made a very compelling speech. And he said, look, when I look at IS research, remember, this is 1980, I see you guys are the framework of the month club. You generate all these frameworks, and these frameworks are easy to generate, they're difficult to test, and they're almost impossible to apply. So the whole field seems fraudulent to me. You have to look outside the field to reference disciplines. And disciplines that have more established, draw your theories and your methods from these disciplines and improve the quality of your discourse, because otherwise you're not going to go anywhere as a field. So the field embraced that idea, and from 1980 all the way through today, we have, of course, gone outside, looked at reference disciplines extensively for our theories and our methods, and we can evaluate the degree of progress based on this approach that we followed. So one dimension of progress is, have our methods improved in rigor? The second dimension is that in the marketplace of ideas, in the knowledge marketplace, are we kind of just in our own bubble, we're talking to each other, or are we actually disseminating these ideas to other pockets of knowledge? In other words, are other disciplines listening to what we say? The third aspect is consistency. If we have progressed as a field, then we have an identity. That means people in the field recognize who we are and recognize our boundary conditions, and we have some kind of consistency between what we say we are and what we actually do. So, in other words, we are partaking in a field that we all recognize. And fourthly, as the field evolves and the institutional demands change, the technologies change, do we adapt? Or are we kind of locked into the same way of doing things? Do we just keep studying the same kinds of topics, or do we rapidly adapt to changes? So the 4 aspects, rigor, impact, consistency, and adaptation, are the 4 things I'm going to show you and share some data with you on how we can evaluate these 4 dimensions. The first one, I'm not going to belabor, because the question of rigor is fairly self-evident. You go in to look at papers in the 1970s and 1980s, and you'll find that, there's very low levels of rigor when you compare it to today's standards. No validity and reliability testing, even regression when it was done, often we never tested assumptions. The dominant epistemology was positivist. The constructs were largely assumed in most cases to be unidimensional. We never really did any kind of power analysis. Method bias was rarely discussed, if ever. And we never really had very tight experimental designs. So you just flip through old issues of NIS Quarterly and you'll find, our methods were poor. compared to today, where we're using structured equation modeling, structured social network analysis, so many different big data techniques, better matching of the theory with the problem. We do pre-testing, we do piloting, we have stronger experimental designs, better use of grounded methods. We don't use only positivist epistemology, we actually are using interpretive and other approaches. And we actually have methodological debates in our journals. So clearly, I mean, there's no data that you need, it's just through sheer observation. There's clearly a dramatic change in terms of methods since clean data's first law. In terms of do others listen to what we say, one of the studies that we did was a sociometric analysis based on the idea of work points and reference points. And the basic concept is this, that if you have a piece of research, an IS article, and if it's published in a marketing journal, we would say it's published at the marketing work point. If it's published in an IS journal, it's at the IS work point. If it's in a management science journal, it's at the management science work point. So we looked at the different work points in which IS-related studies are published, and then we looked at the distribution of references across these work points. So this is a study of work points and reference points. And we looked at the degree to which different work points are actually exchanging citations. So in this study, we looked at 72,600 citations across 1,406 IS articles over 16 journals, and we looked at computer science as a work point, organizational science, management science, marketing, economics. And I'm not going to bore you with the details. The article is published in JAIS, so if you want the reference, you can. I'd be happy to give it to you. But the basic takeaway from this study is that on net, IS was actually contributing to computer science more than computer science was contributing to IS. Now remember, these are IS articles, so there's a bias towards IS. But IS was actually on net giving more to organizational science than vice versa. So the green results are significant results, and the dotted lines indicate on net. What is the average citations? Management science also, IS giving more to management science than management science giving to IS. Not so much in economics, not so much in marketing. So marketing was clear. But clearly, when you looked at some of the traditional reference disciplines of IS, there is progress. There were a couple of studies like this that were done earlier where we never saw these trends. And so when we look at this, we kind of concluded that there is some progress. IS work is being referenced by other disciplines. And it is a substantial change longitudinally over what we saw before. So there's clearly some progress. And so we're kind of in, I would say, some incremental progress in terms of our knowledge marketplace. We are contributing to other disciplines. In terms of consistency, do we have a consistent voice? Well, we looked at this in a couple of different ways. One way is to simply say, what do we say we are as a field? And for that, we turn to the mission of the Association of Information Systems. The mission of the association says that information systems is concerned with the advancement of knowledge in the development, management, and use of information technology to improve organizational performance. So that's what we say we do. Okay? So we said, okay, let's do a big data, brute force approach to try and see what we actually do. And so we took abstracts from major journals and we put it together into a database over a 26-year period. And we looked at the frequency of terms after cleaning up the abstracts. We basically did a content analysis. And we saw in a first 5-year period, the second 5-year period, the third 5-year period, the fourth, the fifth, and then a 6-year period, what are the most frequently used terms? And so over 26 years, we looked at 267,000 words, and we basically found that there are some terms, which we put in this yellow circle A, that appear in all periods. Terms that you would expect: system, information, management, organization, development, user, data, decision, process, model, strategy. We said, okay, this is probably something to do with the core of the field, because these terms are consistently in every 5-year period. There are some terms, like the terms in B, like manager, computer, effectiveness, software, that when you associate these with the core terms, they provide a different context for those terms. So if you associate the word software with system software, information software, management software, it changes the context of those terms. So we call these the contextual core. Some terms like expert and GDSS come in one period and they never come in any other period. So we call this the transitory core, which reflects the ephemeral nature of the field. And finally, we looked at some terms like performance, theory, quality, that come in one period, 5-year period, and then stay for all subsequent periods. So we call this the evolving core, because maybe the core is evolving to these terms. We took the core terms, that A, the field core, and we said, can we make sense out of these terms? We put them together and we came up with data and information systems, their development, modeling, management, and strategy, and how they are related to organizations, processes, decisions, and users. When you look at this, this is directly from brute force abstracts. This is what we say we do as a field. There is some level of consistency between the two. Okay, not perfect, but I would say that we tend to be generally consistent, at least over the period we looked at. So there's some level of consistency. The other thing that we did was the concept, we did a sociometric analysis using cocitations. Now, cocitations, for those of you not familiar with the method, is a very simple method where you take a number of authors that represent the field. So these could be cited authors, they could be highly published authors, but you take a set and say, these 50 authors or these 100 authors are a good representation of what our field is. And then you basically create a matrix of the 100 authors versus 100 authors. And in that matrix, you see how many times are two authors co-cited together, which means that both their names appear in the reference list at the end of the paper. So if two authors are co-cited, the assumption is that their ideas are related. So if both of them are providing inputs into a paper, and both of them are co-cited many times, and they provide inputs into many papers, then we assume that their ideas are related to each other. So once you have this table now of co-citations, it's like a correlation matrix. And you can do, when academics get correlation matrices, they salivate and they get excited, and you can do all kinds of things. So we did multi-dimensional scaling to see the structure of the field, and we clustered the authors and tried to name the clusters. And we found that there was, and this was done some time ago, so this was the 1990s, we had a technology acceptance cluster, we had a strategic planning, technology structures cluster, strategic impact, social process of IS development, cognitive aids, software models, computer-mediated communication, and GDSS. What we found is when we went into the clusters, a lot of these clusters were kind of married to different theoretical perspectives. For example, strategic impact was actually drawing a lot from economics, economic theories. But strategic planning was drawing from management theories. So even though they are dealing with things that should have commonalities, they were kind of locked into their own theoretical basis, and they were not talking to each other. And so you had kind of isolated clusters, and then you had some integrators that were at work. But by and large, when you look at the structure of the field, you say, well, this is a fragmented autocracy. The field has a lot of fragments that are not widely integrated, although there are some integrators at work. So I'd say fragmentation with some integration. When we looked and updated this in 2017, we did co-citation analysis sometime later, And it's obvious that there's a difference. One obvious difference is the field is far more integrated. And you have a lot of people working in different clusters in different areas. So at the minimum, what this says to me is that at least we recognize each other's work, and we're citing different areas, and we're kind of working across different clusters, which was not the case in the 1990s. And so I would argue that this tighter integration is a better representation of where the field is going. And so in terms of consistency, there is consistency between what we say we do and what we do. And there is consistency in terms of integration and recognizing the different clusters in the field. So I would check this box too and say that there is some level of consistency.
Can you go back?
Sure.
I just want to mention that Dr. Adwani is one of our best researchers, and he's an outlier at our department. And he's also an outlier there. He's on top.
Okay. Well, it's good to be unique, right?
Excuse me.
Yes.
Between the first study and the second study, are there some clusters
Yes. Yes.
Can you tell us?
Yes. So if you go here, in this cluster, you'll see that a lot of clusters that were related to the adoption behaviors actually integrated. So the social clusters and the adoption clusters all kind of came together. So we had separation of social impacts of communication and computing and adoption behaviors. Now it kind of all came together as one cluster. So we did see some, but a lot of the directions were more integration of clusters.
I guess, question curiosity here. You start with the mission of the IS, right? And then the 2017 studies came after that mission.
Right.
Right. I don't know what is the latest version of.
Well, this is they have changed the mission.
They haven't changed.
No. So the mission of AIS was chartered around 1990 when AIS.
Never changed since.
Yes, and they've tweaked some terms, but by and large the mission is consistent.
And no way to go and revisit the mission based on the direction and the result of the IS research, or how do you evaluate the mission?
I just presume that the mission is a group of people who are stakeholders of the field who say that this is what our field is all about.
Right, well, that's
Yeah.
back in before 1990.
Right, but they haven't changed it.
Now that's
No, they haven't.
environment.
It's a different environment, but the basic mission of,
different phenomenon.
but if you look at AIS's mission today, it's largely about the deployment of information systems in organizational contexts. It's the same. So they've tweaked it. They've made some wording changes and they've got subcomponents that are different, but the fundamental mission is the same.
There's no systemic way of reviewing it like every 5 years or 2 years or 3 years.
I think they do. They review it every 5 years. So, because if you look at the terminology that they use for the mission, it's fairly broad. So they kept that umbrella. They wanted it to be a broad. So now, so even though over the years, if you look at the field now, it has economics, it has design science, it has behavioral sciences, they all come under the same umbrella. So I would say consistency, yes, there's a direction there that I would check mark. And in terms of adaptation, one study we did was, we said, look, over the number of years, institutional pressures for publishing have changed. Tenure requirements have changed. People have more pressure to publish in top journals. Of course, the technological environment has changed. New phenomena keep coming up, new technologies. So what are our adaptations? So we hypothesized a certain number of adaptations. We said in collaboration, as the institutional pressures go up, as the phenomena become more complex and diverse, we're going to see more collaboration over time. Because you need collaboration to cope with complexity.
Within the field or across the field?
Within the field. Within the field. Over time, we would say that, collaboration is going to go up because people need papers to meet the tenure requirements, so we're going to see more collaboration for both in terms of institutional pressures as well as the nature of the phenomena. We also said that as new phenomena keep arising, how do we cope? What is our coping mechanism to deal with those phenomena? So we said one of the things we'd expect is that people will hang their hats on common theoretical frames. So things that we're familiar with. So when a new technology comes out, we'll still draw on innovation theory. We'll draw on transaction cost theory. We'll draw on the same theoretical frames to hang our hat to cope with these new phenomena. So our expectation was that the broad theoretical frames would stay the same, but the diversity of topics under those frames would increase. That was our expectation. The third expectation was that over time, when you, because it was tougher and tougher to get organizational level data, we would see more micro level studies, individual and group level studies, and the number of macro level, interorganizational and organizational level studies would go down. And finally, our expectation was as the volume of research grows, we would see more meta-analysis and review papers so that you could consolidate the research so the entry barriers to new areas would lower. So if someone wants to study outsourcing, we would see consolidation of research so they can cope with the volume pressures of dealing with this growing repository of research. What we found when we studied this over a period of 15 years, we found increasing collaboration, no doubt about this trend. We found that the broad thematic theoretical areas were consistent and the diversity of topics under those research areas changed. We found the increase in micro over macro, although I suspect that with big data today, if we do this study a few years down the road, maybe this trend is again going to be reversed. But this is during the period we studied, but we didn't find a clear pattern in terms of research organization going up. But overall, we said, you know, our field does do adaptations. They are, now whether you agree with the adaptations or not, the field is not static. It's kind of adapting to changes in institutional and technological environments. So check. So rigor, impact, consistency, adaptation on the broad question of has IS research progressed? So we can conclude that we are a rigorous field with a consistent understanding of who we are. We create knowledge that is cited by other fields, and we learn and adapt to changes in our environment. These are the 4 dimensions we talked about. This is good.
What did you expect a different hypothesis?
Well, these were our expectations. And we said, you know, if you're optimistic about the field, then these expectations are met. This is very good. This is excellent, right? So here's the thing. If you take the same data that we presented and we interpret the same data differently, we can come up with a different conclusion. So all the patterns that we had, let's interpret the same data differently. Here's an alternate interpretation. We create knowledge that is rigorous and consistent, but is not particularly exciting. It is mainly cited by other academics. And our adaptations to pressures are only adaptations that make it easier for us to cope. So all the adaptations are for our convenience. This interpretation is not so good. Not good at all. And so the question is, which is the correct interpretation? Are we producing research that is consistent, rigorous, adaptive, pedantic? I had to dig for that one.
Sure.
Are we producing crap? Is that what's happening? We're kind of dotting the I's, we're doing rigorous work. We've done what Peter Kuhn said we should do. We're, have these theories and, we're doing things that are rigorous and we're adapting to change. But is this the right direction for the field? Is this good? Are we producing boring knowledge with few surprises and little passion and excitement? The difficult questions that we have in our field. Are we creating good knowledge? When you talk to people in our field and we say, point to good knowledge in the field, most people have a hard time. They might point to TAM and say, that's good knowledge. TAM? Is that where we want to rest our claim to fame in our field, that TAM is good knowledge? So it's tough to point to good knowledge. And so the question is, if we're not creating good knowledge, or if we're struggling with the question of good knowledge, can we create better knowledge? Now, why is that? One reason I think that we've got a problem in our field is because of this word, theory. We have kind of put theory on a pedestal. So, like I said yesterday, the number of times I've gone back to authors and said, improve your theory, improve your theory. We kind of put it on, and so we said, theory is so important. But if it's so darn important for our field, why do we outsource it? Is that because Peter Keen said we should outsource it? We go outside for theories? We don't develop our own theories. We kind of say, let's rely on other fields for theory. And a lot of people in the field don't really understand what theory is. So we've outsourced most of our theory to reference disciplines. Now, at one level, Peter Keen was right. It makes sense. Because if you take any area in the field, you take the area of strategic impact and competitive impacts of systems. In the 1980s and 90s, a lot of the studies we were doing were largely anecdotal, small case studies. But when we brought transaction cost economics and resource-based theories, we had a more consistent, coherent understanding of competitive advantage. So it clearly improved the rigor of our thinking. So there is a rationale. The rationale also makes sense because if we draw from reference disciplines, then we can talk to our marketing colleagues, we can talk to our economic colleagues, and we talk at the same level using similar terminology, so it ups our status as a field. So there is a rationale for not reinventing the wheel and drawing from those theories. But the question that I have is, are we scripting our epistemology? Have we done it in so far, we've taken it so far now, that there has become a formula for doing research? And yesterday I talked about this. I talked about the script for successful IS research. Identify a problem, go to the theory supermarket, get a theory that's on sale. If it comes with methods, that's great. Adapt the theory to the context. Some papers are theory-driven, theory-informed, build a model, test it, and then refine it. And our journals demand a strong fit between the theory and the problem. So this is what most people who want to publish in our field do. But if you look at this carefully, if this is the script for successfully producing research, and I showed you some evidence, that there's evidence in top journals that we're doing this, we rarely extend theories and we largely use IS as nominal or proxy. So if we do this, why does this work for the system? The reason this formula works is because a lot of reviewers in our system are type 1 reviewers. They're looking for problems in the paper. And if we can go out and borrow theories, they've already dotted the I's and they've crossed the T's. They've got all the little kinks and the logic and the consistency, they've taken care of that. So the chances of finding a type 1 error go down when you actually borrow theories from other disciplines. And so it works very well for the system. It's deemed highly legitimate, an appropriate way to create knowledge. It's highly respected in our field. So a lot of our doctoral students, they kind of look at the problem, they look for theories, they try to frame the problem through that theoretical lens, they create the little mid-level models, and it's acceptable practice in our field. It's become institutionalized as an acceptable practice. And so it's low risk and the right way, particularly in an environment where we are pushing faculty and researchers to publish in top journals. So it's kind of like we've got the pressure on them. And in US institutions, there's a tight time clock, 5 years. You've got to publish, otherwise you're not going to get tenure in that 5-year period. So this behavior is now become rational behavior to follow this kind of script to get published. The problem is the script may not work for good knowledge. It may work for the system, but it may not work for good knowledge. Why? Because in this entire cycle, where is the new ideas? Where's the spark? Where's the passion? Where are the surprises? We're largely working within a comfort zone where we reduce the probability of surprises. And so we've kind of found ourselves in this system that we've created for ourselves, where it's comfortable to create work, it passes the test of rigor, it gets through our process, but it has very few novel ideas. Truth is largely conformity to the received theoretical insight. It's kind of like, give you this example. There was this American Indian chief. Now, he was a chief living in modern times. And his Indians came up to him and said, Chief, are we going to have a cold winter? The American Indian chief says, yes, it's going to be a cold winter. Go gather firewood. Go gather more and more wood, because we need the wood for the winter. Now, being a practical man living in modern times, he said, let me check with the National Weather Service. So he calls the National Weather Service and says, are we going to have a cold winter? And the National Weather Service says, yes, it's going to be a cold winter. So he goes and tells his Indians, go gather more firewood. It's going to be a cold winter. After a few weeks, he calls the National Weather Service again and said, is it going to be a cold winter? And they said, yes, it's going to be a very cold winter. And the chief says, how do you know that? How can you be so sure it's going to be a cold winter? And the person at the National Weather Service says, well, it's pretty obvious. The Indians are gathering firewood like crazy. So it's a closed loop. There's no new ideas coming, one's following the other. So it's kind of like this circuit. We're working within a comfort zone. The script is strong because IS is a low paradigm field. We have limited past intellectual victories and little consensus on what other forms theorizing could take. So we're kind of locked into a way of doing things. It's been institutionalized, but in doing this, it's really tough to break this cycle. The problems the script causes for the field, it causes cognitive dependencies. If you have a new phenomenon, social media coming, or outsourcing, or open source, whatever the phenomena is, if we take a theoretical perspective, that theory and that lens is going to frame our models. So our initial model is framed. The constructs are framed, the theory is framed, the logic is framed. Anyone building on that has to be subject to path dependencies. There's a dependency that once you've locked into that framing, all future research is going to build on the same framing. And so you basically, again, close the cycle for innovative ideas because you're locked into a certain theoretical framing. You're locked into constructs because whatever constructs you use initially are the ones that are going to be built on, because in the field, we're always encouraging cumulative tradition, build on each other's research. We have instrumentation dependencies. Why? Because you can only study what you can measure. And once you have the instrumentation in place, other people are going to leverage that instrumentation, and you kind of again create a path dependency. You have outcome dependencies, and this is interesting. When you have your hypothesis, you rarely challenge if the hypothesis is not supported. Most of the time, you will cast aspersions on your methodology. You'll rarely go in and challenge the theory because the theory is sacrosanct. You know, it comes from an outside discipline. And so what we often do is we accept the theory and we challenge ourselves on the methodology. But the problem is that in many cases, the theory may be problematic. The theory may not be appropriate for the phenomena that we're looking at, but we rarely challenge the theory.
I will add to this here, also, how many journals or top journals would accept a paper that you started with 6 hypotheses and you got only one hypothesis accepted?
Yes, that's the other thing. So we tend to try and always submit papers that have significant findings. The significant findings are the ones that are consistent with the borrowed theory. And the reason we do that is because our journals will not accept the insignificant findings. And yet, it's the insignificant findings that might be the ones that actually challenge the theory. But those are the ones that are not accepted. Absolutely.
But you need a reviewer who thinks out of the box.
That's
out
right.
Of these small
That is exactly why we
We're
are
looking about the first reviewer
Yes.
yesterday.
We're locked into a way of doing things. We are locked into these cognitive dependencies. I myself am as guilty as the next person of doing this. And we institutionalize the whole research genre. We've institutionalized it because if the paper follows a certain script. The paper has an introduction, it has a literature review, it has some theory, it has hypothesis, it has methodology. A lot of times it's survey with constructs and validity and reliability, and then we draw conclusions supporting the hypothesis, and then we write high-level social implications. This is a standard template of a paper. If we deviate from that template, the reviewers will say, what is this? This doesn't seem to work. What are you doing? They don't understand it, it's outside the norm, and they tend to reject it. So then it comes back into the cognitive dependencies we have. We follow the script back again, because that's what our institutions are encouraging us to do. And so we've kind of created this vicious cycle, where we have cognitive dependencies, we've institutionalized the genre, and to the exclusion of alternate genres. This is the play space for IS research. If you look at practical use and you look at theoretical use, more abstract work has theoretical use, more tangible work has practical use. This is where we play. We play in the middle. These are our little models with arrows. This is where we play. This is where the script is. We take abstract ideas over here, we create our mid-level models, and then we test them. And in doing that, we're satisfying between the empirical and the theoretical, the practitioner and the researcher, the tangible and the abstract, the testable and the interesting, the mundane and the powerful, the idiosyncratic and the generalizable. We're kind of working in the middle because all our journals demand that we kind of create our models that have theory, they have hypothesis, and they have tests. Everything has to be in one paper. And so we kind of have to sacrifice and make trade-offs. And so our field has hundreds of incommensurate models, and sometimes you look at the field and say, okay, yeah, I have to meta-analyze or I have to summarize this to really understand what is the knowledge that's created in the field. So, of course, a lot of things I'm mentioning here are a little exaggerated. The situation is not as dire as I make it out to be. But I'm doing that to make a point that when Peter Keene came in and said, look at reference disciplines, we've done that in spades, but have we overshot the mark? Have we come to a point where we're doing the same kind of research, it's following a formula, and we're not dealing with innovation and new ideas? And is our field demanding the need for new ideas? So there's probably work that should be done here. There's work that can be done here. So for example, if we have in our field a good abstract thinker, a good abstract thinker is one who is an inveterate collector of facts and can see connections in abstract space. Some people are good abstract thinkers, some people are not. But in our field of 10,000 members who are interested in IS research, don't you think that there will be a small percentage that are good abstract thinkers? If they can theorize themselves and come up with interesting concepts and ideas and send it to our top journals, what would our top journals say? they would say, what is this? How do you benchmark this? Ground it in the literature. If you ground it in the literature, you're diluting the impact of the ideas. Or what they will say is, how do I know this is true? Test it. If you test it, you're taking broad, powerful ideas and you have to make them narrow and testable, right? So both sides, the theoretician feels shackled. Chains on one side, chains on the other side, and so they say, I'm not even going to try it. So we are not leveraging our human resource. Good abstract thinkers who might have really interesting indigenous ideas that are beneficial to the field are not seeing the daylight because of our institutional structures. Yes?
Also, the top journals, they accept only 10%. And if you count the IS community, 10,000, it means more than 9,000 are discarded. Maybe good idea, they didn't have chance to access this journal to be seen, to be reviewed and so on.
And it's 10%, but if you have a purely theoretical idea, there's probably much lower than that. It's not going to be
So
accepted.
we are focusing on the one
Because they want the idea to be grounded, they want it to be tested, and so that innovation is being thwarted by, and it's not only our field. I see this in some other field. I see this in marketing. I see this a little in management. So it's not only our field, but we do have a semblance of a problem. Yes?
I think one way we can learn from other fields, if you look at organizational behavior, they have their top journals are Academy of Management journals. So they have Academy of Management Review, which is specialized in the general large theory, but they don't test it in those kind of papers.
Yeah.
And then you have AMJ, which is Academy of Management Journal, smaller theories, but testable, and they test in the same paper. I think that's a good model.
It is a good model, except what has happened in that field is, if you look at Academy of Management Review, it is less about new theories and more about review of existing research. So they tend to de-emphasize the theory and emphasize the review. And so in that sense, even if you send some novel abstract idea to Academy of Management Review, they will tell you to keep grounding it in the literature and frame it in the literature. So they have somewhat of the same. It's better, but they also have their own unique problems.
Professor,
Yes.
has there been any initiatives in the IS field similar to AMR and AMG, to try and give an outlet for?
Yes, there is. Well, there is a theory and review section, or a class of papers in MIS Quarterly that's called Theory and Review. It used to be an explicit section with a separate editor. So Lynn Marcus was an editor for some time. Anne Marshak was an editor for some time, just for that section.
So they go through a different review process?
They go through this. They go through a review process that it's different people who are more appreciative of theory and review type papers.
So the expectations would be different but similar?
Yeah, the expectations are different. The expectations is how do you consolidate and synthesize reviews to create new ideas. So that, but again, it has the same problems as the Academy of Management Review. They focus more on the review and less on the theory. So some of the same ideas, the problems here. So here's the issue. Now at this point, we are at a crossroads in our field, because we are now replacing a lot of the terms IT with the term digital. So things that we call IT strategy, we're calling it digital strategy. IT business alignment, we're calling it digital alignment. We are using terms like digital everywhere. Now, is this just old wine in new bottles, or is there something fundamentally different about this environment? And if it's old wine in new bottles, if it's the same old thing and we're just changing the term, then I would say maybe you could make a case that this old approach that we're following, the one that Peter Keene says that we should, which has paid off in terms of impact and quality and rigor, because if you look at our papers, they're comparable to all journals. The top journals are very good in terms of Citations and Impact and Rigor. MISQ is one of the best journals in business in general. So clearly we have benefited tremendously from looking at reference disciplines. But if we are truly at a point of inflection, if we are truly looking at a changing digital environment, then maybe this approach is not the right approach. If we are in an environment that demands more creativity. So some of you might have the opinion that digital is just, it's just more of the same, change and new technologies. But some of you might see it as fundamentally different. So I'll give you my perspective on whether digital is different from IT. Okay? So the way I see it, I see digital as fundamentally different. How is it different? If you go back before to the 1960s all the way to 2000, the 1960s we had a mainframe, then we had mini computers, then we had the PC, we had decision support systems, we had strategic systems, we had enterprise systems. All of these systems were largely boxes with hardware and software. So when you look at all the research in IS that was done, all the way till, I would say, approximately 2000, it's largely dealing with taking a box and putting it into an organizational context. So if you look at most of our research in information systems, it's about how do we make the box work in the organization? How does the box have an impact? How do we adopt it? How do we use it? How do we deploy it? How do we design it? So all our work and all our theories were largely about how individuals, groups, organizations, markets interact with these boxes. So most of our models have a user, they have a system, they have a context, and they have these mid-level models. So this is the way I see the environment all the way to 2000. After 2000, we have SMAC-I. SMAC stands for social, mobile, analytics, cloud, Internet of Things. So what's different here? The two things that I think are different is that instead of talking about boxes, digital is largely about taking every component of an organization, the process, the objects in an organization, the people in an organization, and enhancing their ability to process, store, and communicate information. So what fundamental difference in my mind is that digital is infrastructural. It's essentially changing technology to be a part of the fabric of the organization. It's very much infrastructural, and when you enhance every component of an organization and you make it infrastructural, you can generate tremendous data, and you connect this data, you can create a lot of interesting analytics and things that you could do. And of course, it's subject to unique economics. So what's fundamentally different about digital in my mind is the infrastructural and unique economics of digital. The four dimensions where I think digital is different from IT. Dimension number one is embeddedness. What you have is when you have physical objects, most physical objects, you have a form of the object that constrains the function of the object. So the chair's form is constraining its functionality. When you talk about digital products and digital services, the relationship between form and functionality breaks down. In many cases, for digital products, your functionality may not even exist till you actually sell the product, and the functionality could evolve after you sell the product. So you don't even know the functionality when the product is being sold. So a fundamental difference is the breakdown between function is no longer constrained by form. The second difference is decoupling. In traditional products, there is a tight coupling between the content and the container. So if you have a Sony Walkman, the Sony Walkman system, the container contains the music which is in a certain format, and you cannot separate that content from the container. It works in that container. The television has certain signals. It works in that container. But in a digital environment, you're basically separating the content from the delivery system. And what that does then is it opens up so many avenues for connecting the content and container and creating new kinds of innovation, which is fundamentally different from the box approach of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. All forms of content can now be syndicated. The third difference that I think is fundamental in between digital and IT is the concept of representation. When I go into a restaurant, the path that I take is tracked digitally. The waiter that I interact with, that social interaction with the waiter can be tracked digitally. The menu that I order, the content that I order from the menu is tracked digitally. The table that I sit on is tracked geographically, digitally. That entire experience, time, contacts, relationship, geographic space is all tracked digitally. And if I can evaluate that entire customer experience, then the person that is evaluating knows how all this tracking went. Did it go well or did it go badly? So what you have with digital is you have representation of behaviors and states of people over time, space, and interactions. And you can change the level of granularity to manipulate digital experiences. And so the third dimension on which I think digital is fundamentally different from IT is in the granularity of representation that never existed when you talked about boxes of hardware and software. And finally, the concept of generativity. When you connect networks with people, interesting things happen. And sometimes unpredictable things happen. So networks tend to be generative. You not only have network effects, where the value of every participant in a network is proportional to the square of the size of the network, so you have network effects, but you also have innovation that could take place, crowdsourcing, predictive models, when you have people connected through networks. And so combinatorial complexity, unanticipated innovation takes place through generativity. So embeddedness, decoupling, representation, and generativity are the infrastructural dimensions of digital that make what I think this environment different. And so the question that I have for the field in general is, following traditional approaches where we draw reference discipline theories and we study these little models, is that good enough to study something that's fundamentally different now and 5 years and 10 years down the road? Because this is where we are. Is this going to be, do we need flexibility in theorizing? Do we need a different approach? Or can we just keep borrowing theory of reasoned action and creating box models of talent? Is that going to take us where we need to go as a field? And I would say no. I would say if we continue to do that, we are doomed for failure. We need to change. The question is how, and how do you change the culture of something that's locked in? And I'm not criticizing the approaches that we followed. I think they have served their purpose. The quality and respect that IS gets as a field today is very, very high in terms of the quality of work. We don't see the criticisms we saw in the 1980s where people ridicule, what are you guys doing? No one says that. Well, they say some people do, but by and large, they are impressed with the quality of our journals. So we've done well. The question is, should we continue the same approach? Of course, here's some example. I'll share one example of how embeddedness, decoupling, representation, and generativity lead to innovative thinking. I worked with a sanitation company, and this sanitation company had a responsibility for cleaning urinals public urinals. So their job was to keep them clean. And they had a particular problem with male urinals. And the problem was the male urinals they couldn't keep them clean. They were dirty, and a lot of them were attributed to the fact that men could not shoot straight. So they said, let's look for a digital solution to this problem. And what they did was, they took a target and they put it in the urinal. And they encouraged people to shoot for that target. They put a chip in the target. And in that chip, the chip would basically track how accurate you were. The closer you were to the center, the more points you would get on your app. So they linked the chip to an app, and basically if you shot straighter, you get more points. And then they gamified it, and they socialized it. So males were actually sharing their points on this app. This is actually happened. And it was amazing that just the digitization reduced their cost for keeping the urinals clean, because people were excited about accumulating points. They traded points for prizes. They shared their points with their male colleagues, and it was a whole system that they created. So digitization, not only did they have embeddedness, they had representation, they had generativity, and they had decoupling. They did all of them together and created innovative ideas. So I just throw this, it's a funny example, but it illustrates that we need a different kind of thinking when we think about innovation in the digital world. For example, if we look at the digital world, we have open versus closed innovation platforms. None of our traditional theories can deal with open and closed innovation platforms. We need a new kind of thinking. We need socio-technical constructs, constructs that are more embedded. We don't have the building blocks for theories until we actually develop new constructs that deal with embeddedness. So digital identity type constructs, or constructs that deal with digital nativity, things that really imbricate the social and the technical components. No more privacy and security research. We need more combinatorial and fit models, which we don't have. We need to derive new value in different contexts. The models for digital environments need to be more dynamic than more static. Digital is characterized by rapid experimentation. We really don't have good models for modeling these rapid experiments, so we need methodological improvements to study these. We need more distributed innovation models. Largely, if you look at most of our models in research on innovation, they're largely dealing with innovation in a certain context, in a certain environment. What are the factors that lead up to adoption behaviors? But now, with crowdsourcing, with distributed innovation, the models need to be different. We need more work on creative behaviors, more work on affordances and appropriation, more options thinking, realizing digital visions. So the whole concept of alignment is disappearing. Before, we spent so much work on aligning our business strategy with our IT strategy. But now it's no longer so much about alignment, it's more about realizing digital visions. Can you set a digital vision, and then can you pull the resources together to create and realize that vision? And we don't have good understanding of that. Our existing models don't do enough. Customer experiences, for platforms for generativity and control, multi-level thinking. We need more of those models. So when I look at the types of things that we need to study, I would argue that the existing modus operandi has served its purpose, it's reaching diminishing returns. We need to modify it, improve it, encourage more innovative thinking. Otherwise, we're not going to go in a very productive direction. Now, I do have other things, some recommendations, and I'm not going to go through them, but I've kind of talked a little bit about these different things. What I'm going to do is just conclude this. this is where we are. If we look at IS phenomena, this is the current mode that we follow. We follow the reference discipline script. We create and test many incommensurate mid-range models, and then we consolidate them. That's how we study things today. In today's environment, with digitization, we have digital manifestations that have plasticity that links organizational layers. They have a different economic structure, they imbricate the social and the material worlds, and they have combinatorial complexity. In this digital environment, what I would suggest is that we broaden our knowledge ecology. We allow different types of models in our journals. That includes blue sea theorizing, pure empiricism, ideas where we can take problems and theorize about the problems and the solutions, which right now we don't do. And even when we engage in borrowing theories, we do something that I mentioned yesterday. We look at how the phenomena can change the theory. We don't accept theories and just test them in our context. And that can lead to more innovative theories. Of course, doing this is going to be tough because we have a culture, we have institutional norms that are already set. There are some promising things that are happening in our field. For example, in MIS Quarterly, they are opening up the research note section to some innovative ideas. So the idea that if you have some truly innovative ideas, they can be sent to the research note section, and if they go through the review process, they might have some space reserved for purely innovative ideas. No detailed empiricism, just abstract thinking, good abstract thought. There is some talk among editorial boards at ISR and MISQ where they are training reviewers to do more type 2 reviewing. Be open to innovative ideas that could change the direction of the field. Of course, having that done successfully is going to take time, and it's going to take a cultural change. But I'm seeing some promising signs in our forums where people are beginning to talk about some of these things. Some of the special issues that you see in MIS Quarterly, ISR, and JMIS are focusing on digital, and they're encouraging new digital models and new digital theories. I think that's a promising sign. So while we haven't gone all the way, there are some people who are recognizing the problem and are trying to propose certain solutions. Of course, individually, as a community, we have certain responsibilities. And so when we send papers, we can engage multiple theories. We can try and look at the two-way interaction between the theory and the phenomena. So there are certain things that we can do to improve the quality of our discourse and try to adapt to the digital world. So let me conclude. The key question that I'm raising here is, can the fundamental questions concerning IS and the digital world be addressed just by relying on theories that originate from reference disciplines? If yes, then we will create crap, knowledge that's useful for our system's viability and internal exchange, but boring, lacking innovation, surprises, and unable to create good knowledge on the new emerging digital phenomena. If no, then we have to be willing to soften our institutional structures to engage people to do different kinds of research, alternative scripts, people who are innovative thinkers, who can provide theoretical ideas. We need to open up space in our journals for those ideas. Pure empiricism that can lead to further theorizing is something that we should open our journals up to. And also, even if we take reference discipline theories, we need a deeper engagement with these theories. Just not take the theory and test it in our context, but ask ourselves, how can the phenomena change the theory? And that creates a wider knowledge ecology. And I think that wider and flexible knowledge ecology is needed for the field to effectively cope with the Yes.
Just one comment here. So perhaps we need to go back and back to square one, I guess. Back to the 90s and before the 90s. And perhaps we have a problem with the word systems in our discipline. Because we're talking about systems, and I think we're going in the direction that we have on one system. And technology becomes about activities, and then don't have to worry about it as an IS researcher or IS practitioner. Looks like you want to create this hardware and software just need to do it. So I think the whole paradigm has to be changed in order just to give us the word IT, because it becomes utilities.
Right.
And the systems, because we don't talk about systems and boxes,
Yeah.
and just talking about ecology, and that will really
Yes.
lead us to go back and redraft the
Yeah.
definition of
I think I think some rethinking needs to be done. Maybe the concept of systems, which is so fundamental to our discipline, we might need to rethink systems more in terms of ecological terms. We can do that. If we get rid of the word system altogether, think about what's going to happen with other disciplines, the overlap, the problems that we are facing.
Well, I think our main concern is the information. All right.
But so is library and information sciences. So is computer information systems.
Yeah, that's why the main, that's why we're talking perhaps this is your mind here. All right, now, I mean, one of the things here, IS is the eclectic field, okay, and we're talking about this for a long time. So how is it going to be run? You know, more other disciplines would be merged in, or we can have fewer disciplines would be merged in, or would be cross over in IS research. This is something else that you're today.
Yeah, and I think that if you talk to people in the field, there's a lot of disagreement. There are hardliners that really believe that if we are going to have a field, we have to have the IT artifact central to the field. That means every model, every structure has to have the IT artifact. We have to theorize about the IT artifact. There are others in the field that believe IT artifact is now diffused in the digital world. And so even if we try and study how technology can improve disability or health, that is valid IS research. Now, if that is valid IS research, then what about the health sciences? How do they do digital studies? Yeah, so so it becomes an issue. Should we care about our dependent variable, or could our dependent variable, as long as it's digital, all dependent variables are good? So we have a real issue. We have to think this out, and there are people who disagree in the field. So we're not going to come to a quick resolution. There are old timers who strongly believe that central to the field is the IT artifact. And if you get rid of that, then we don't have a field. Then anything goes, because everything's digital. In the future, 5 years from now, there'll be digital chips in this, there'll be this, and everything around here. Everything's digital. So what is our field then? If we don't have the IT artifact, if we don't theorize about it. So these are tough questions. And there's no simple answer. I don't have the answers for sure. And I think a lot of people in the field would struggle with the answers. But I think we have to start looking at the changing world and thinking, how can we create better knowledge for this world? And I don't think drawing from the theory of reasoned action and doing more TAM models is going to help that. Yes.
Have you noticed a change in the behavior of IS researchers as they advance in their careers? So you mentioned that junior faculty members usually follow the script. So as they advance, do they tend to take more risk in their research? Should we look for innovation of the young ones who are?
I see what happens is because it's so difficult to publish in IS, a lot of researchers get burnt out. So you see the researchers that continue and they make it to full professor and they have some liberties, they start playing around with some broader thought pieces and provide insight and perspective. But I see a lot of people that kind of just give up on research. They make tenure and then they say, oh my gosh, this is too difficult.
So I mean, all the PhD programs now, I mean, usually those are scholarly and ISR that uses for the professors and PhD programs. Is there any art or any
Yeah, that's a really good question.
any platform that you guys can put together here and say, well, what would be the future of an IS PhD program?
Well,
You are molding and shaping those insertions.
I think
that's
what shocked me in December in Seoul, I had the good fortune of chairing the ISIS doctoral consortium, which is 4 days I spent with 40 PhD students who were from across the world. And I also participated in reviewing over 100 PhD dissertations to select these students. And what was shocking to us was how many of these students were using big data samples. They were using data to drive their research questions. And some of them were not really using much theory. They were focusing more on analytics and methods. Now, I don't know whether this is a reflection of things to come in the field, but it's certainly of some concern. So are we having a young generation of scholars that are focusing more on analytics and data manipulation than thinking about substantive problems and theory? In which case, are we throwing out the baby with the bathwater? So I don't know the answer, but I think that there are some programs in the United States, like the University of Minnesota, like University of Texas, that have basically moved strongly in the direction of analytics and methods. And they're focusing a lot on training students in methods, as opposed to understanding research problems and theory.
Yes, one other observation here. You can see that the knowledge management field is evolving here, and it's a bit confusing between the IS management and the knowledge management. And I'm not sure how the knowledge management fit with the IS.
Yeah, and that comes back to your basic question about what is the IS field. For the most part, when knowledge management came in, the IS field embraced knowledge management. And they said, you have data, you have information, you have knowledge, and then if you put the knowledge in boxes, it becomes very much a part of the information systems. And so I think that there is, knowledge management tends to spread across the management disciplines, the IS discipline, to some extent marketing disciplines. So it seems to be a cross-disciplinary phenomena. If we are going to embrace components of knowledge management, we would embrace the system components, but that's not always the case.
So you would have like an information as a concept, not the concept in the core
Yes.
of the IS.
Yes.
You put here in the
Yes,
slide.
exactly.
We have the knowledge, the word knowledge.
We have
along with the
knowledge.
information,
Yes,
or-
we put knowledge, and then we look at the attributes of information on knowledge. That would be a part of our domain.
So if I may, Dr. Robert, we'll take the last question for.
I'd like to
We'll have
to hear about your opinion. You mentioned many restrictions, limitations of our field. I would like to see your opinion about the epistemological problem view of the knowledge we want to create.
Yes.
There is the positivism. We
Yes.
believe the knowledge exists, and what we need to do is just create it through
Yes.
method and through
Yeah.
the framework to describe. And the other side, we have what we call the design research.
Yes.
We'd like they focus more on how we can change the world.
That's
we
right.
can structure
That's
about
right.
and structure problem. And there is a very, if you look at most USA journals, they focus on positivism.
Yes.
However, the European, they focus more on this
Quality.
design. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your opinion about how we
Yeah.
can change?
So in my opinion is that the broad definition of AIS is a good one. we are interested as a field in the effective deployment of information systems in organizational contexts. So that's the broader breadth. In doing that, we should be looking at artifacts, creating artifacts. So we can create the artifact in terms of the system. We can create an artifact in terms of approaches to create these systems and methodologies, or we can create the artifact in terms of knowledge. So our output is creation of artifacts. Theory is an artifact of knowledge.
It is dominant.
Yeah, so it is a component. So in behavioral sciences, we should be looking at creating theoretical products that add value to our abstract thinking, our understanding of deployment of systems in organizations. In design science, we should be thinking about creating methods and creating good systems. And how do we create these good systems so we can change the world, as you put it? So I think design science and the behavioral sciences actually have a role in creating artifacts. One is creating theoretical artifacts and knowledge and understanding of systems and organizations. The other one is creating, in many cases, tangible artifacts and methodologies. Both of them have a role within the umbrella of what the IS field is all about.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goldberg.
Right. Thank you.